How to survive and stay alive in medieval Europe. Greetings, dear time traveler. I am your loyal advisor, Shinbai. Our destination is once again medieval Europe. Unfortunately, you'll likely be an ordinary commoner. Therefore, your first priority should be survival. If this guide helps you survive, please show your appreciation, though I wouldn't dream of asking for a coin. You see, the ancient world was fraught with danger, poor sanitation, terrible working conditions, primitive medicine, and widespread ignorance. All these could easily take your life. Medieval European society is a prime example. When you arrive in this era, as a commoner with no status, the slightest mistake could have fatal consequences. To avoid such a tragic fate, let's first review some of the top causes of death in the Middle Ages. War is the first thing that comes to mind. In medieval warfare, it was common for civilians of the enemy to be plundered and slaughtered. However, medieval wars were generally small-scale, so avoiding them was somewhat easier. More massacres came from conflicts between different ethnic and religious groups. If you're transported into the body of a newborn, then congratulations, your chances of survival are very low, as your modern consciousness struggles inside that tiny, helpless body. There's truly little you can do. You can only hope for good fortune. According to historical records, among every 12 to 18 newborns in the lower class, only 3 or 4 would likely survive to adulthood. Many died before the age of 7. Even in many noble families, child survival rates were not very high. King Edward I of England and his first wife had at least 14 children. Of them, only 1 son, and 5 daughters lived to adulthood. Even King Edward III, who had many children, had 8 sons, and it's likely that 3 of them died in infancy. If you're a woman, there was a high probability of death during childbirth. Childbed fever was a dreaded disease that caused high mortality rates for mothers, even into the modern era. But men weren't much luckier. According to the Chronicle of Ardors, for every 36 households, 13 women would remarry after their husbands' deaths, even if you survived adolescence or a successful childbirth. Plagues, diseases, and infections were waiting for you. The Black Death from 1346 to 1353 was the worst plague of the late Middle Ages. Over 30% of the population died from it. According to English royal records, from 1348 to 1375, the average life expectancy was just 17.33 years. For commoners, the survival rate was even worse. Famine was another disaster with a high death rate. Beginning in the spring of 1315, unusually heavy rain fell across Europe. Average temperatures dropped, leading to widespread crop failures. In England, prices soared. The price of salt, for example, jumped from 30 to 40 shillings. In the Lorraine region, wheat prices rose by 320%. The constant rain also led to outbreaks of pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis. These diseases weakened many people, making it harder to survive the famine. Chronicles recorded many cases of infanticide and cannibalism. Some even opened the graves of the recently deceased to eat the fresh corpses. like ghouls. Robbers and criminals also ran rampant. Many healthy people also met with misfortune, often leading to death. Therefore, I sincerely hope you don't travel to these periods. Furthermore, due to primitive medicine, goiter, cancer, rashes, edema, cleft lip, and scrofula were all common diseases that could easily kill you. But even if you survived plagues, famine, disease, or injury, and were lucky enough to be treated by a doctor, well, congratulations, you were still likely to die. From their expert medical skills, doctors would likely use bloodletting with leeches to cure all your ailments. If you got scrofula, also known as the king's evil, your neck would swell up terribly. In this case, doctors were useless. You could only hope for the king's grace. In 11th century England and France, kings held public ceremonies to cure scrofula. People at the time believed that being touched by the king could cure the disease. If you weren't cured, it meant your faith wasn't strong enough. If you were lucky enough to survive a healthy childhood, avoiding sickness and plagues, you still probably wouldn't live a long life. A study of 1,500 excavated medieval skeletons found that, among this group, the most common age of death was 42. In the 21st century, it's around 72. Even medieval monarchs didn't have high life expectancies. Between 918 and 1250, the average lifespan for a German king was 46. For French kings, between 987 and 1270, it was 55. And for English kings, from 1066 to 1272, the average was 54. Furthermore, many medieval laws and customs could catch you completely off guard in that unfamiliar environment. But with a male servant, a free woman who did so would face the death penalty. Regarding homosexuality, you had to be mindful of the time and place. Tolerance for it varied by region. For example, in German law codes, it was almost never mentioned as improper. But in the 14th century Republic of Venice, homosexuals were sentenced to death. They were burned at the stake. If you were a pervert, you could also get into trouble. In the late Middle Ages, in Avignon, France, a man was sentenced to death for forcing his way into a women's bathhouse. Finally, being a heretic could get you sent to the stake. This was especially true in the late Middle Ages. A time traveler like you, with your different worldview, could easily be mistaken for a heretic and burned. Of course, this risk was actually greater in the centuries that followed the Middle Ages. During that time, this fate was more common for actual heretics, clergy members, or other persecuted groups. To be absolutely safe, I think it's best to be cautious. To get more information, I will help you maximize your chances of survival after you arrive, and avoid dying from these unfortunate causes. First, you must pay close attention to hygiene and daily habits. The Middle Ages lacked the variety of cleaning products we have today. You had to use local materials to clean yourself. If you live near a clean public bathhouse, that would be ideal. If not, I suggest finding a suitable river or lake to bathe in regularly. As a commoner, you could rarely afford cleaning products like soap. Therefore, you can use alkaline items like wood ash to wash your hands and body, salt, vinegar, and animal fats are also good options. Of course, you must consider what you can afford and act accordingly. Here is also a place that easily harbors dirt. If local customs allow, I suggest you simply shave your head. Food and drinking water safety is extremely important. The Middle Ages lacked clean drinking water. Therefore, many people drank alcohol instead of water. Pay attention. Never drink water from an unknown source. It's better to get drunk than to risk your life. If possible, avoid crowded urban areas to prevent catching infectious diseases. Also, stay away from entertainment venues. If you really must go, that's your business. I suggest keeping your living environment dry and getting plenty of sun. Dark, damp environments breed germs, which can lead to a premature death. Second, you need to anticipate and avoid disasters. The Great Famine and the Black Death of the 14th century are two periods to avoid at all costs. If you're unlucky enough to land in that century, try to get out of Europe. Furthermore, you should know the times and locations of major wars. Stay far away from battlefields to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. For example, the 100 Years' War and the Hussite Wars. Also, avoid regions of constant conflict, like southern Iberia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Improve your social status is a vital way to improve your situation. Although in the Middle Ages, a commoner becoming a noble was nearly impossible, you could still learn a practical skill to become a stonemason, blacksmith, or carpenter craftsman of higher status. This would allow you to earn a better income, eat more nutritious food, and build a stronger body to resist disease. At the same time, these were skilled professions. Craftsmen were often spared during wars and raids. Of course, obeying the law is also crucial. I believe that by studying enough and listening to your advisor's counsel, you can definitely avoid a one-day trip to the execution platform. However, regarding laws and social customs, it can be quite difficult. You must learn the various laws of different regions. Many of them are vastly different from modern society. And, you know, wrongful convictions happen even in modern times. In an era with an imperfect legal system, even if you keep a low profile and act cautiously, it's hard to avoid missteps. If you're really unlucky and for some reason are sentenced to death, then don't struggle. Repent sincerely. Maybe they will agree to grant you a small final request. A chronicler recorded that in Paris in 1430, a young girl requested to marry a man sentenced to death, and her request was granted. In Chalons, in 1427, two prostitutes pleaded to marry two robbers who were about to be executed. Of course, if you're already headed for the execution ground, there's also a slim chance of a miracle. In January 1475, a Parisian notary named Jean Devrouer recorded the case of an archer accused of theft. The man was sentenced to be hanged at the Great Gibbet outside the capital walls on the day of the execution. A group of surgeons petitioned King Louis XI, asking to use the prisoner as a live subject for an anatomical study. The petition was approved. The doctors cut open the man's abdomen and observed his organs. Miraculously, the doctors then put his organs back and stitched him up. Afterwards, the king paid for his recovery costs. The archer recovered within 2 weeks, and his death sentence was pardoned. He even received generous compensation for the ordeal he had suffered. If you're sentenced to death, I wonder if you'll have such good luck. In any case, I will do everything I can during the preparation phase to help you avoid the worst outcomes. Once you embark on your journey, please be sure to act with caution and pay attention to every detail. I wish you the best of luck in surviving your trip. By now, I bet all of you are missing the days of being kings and nobles. Don't forget to send your advisor 2 of your most humble little coins. Next time, I promise to make you a person of great importance. Farewell.